Welcome to Doctorates of the Absurd, your provider of belief on demand.
And welcome to this deep dive. We're here to take the sources you've given us, the complex articles, the dense research, and really distill them down. Our job is to give you a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed on the big ideas shaping our world.
And I feel like this one today is something we need more than ever. The existential itch we're trying to scratch is just so central to how we live now. We're
Yeah.
in this culture that is just screaming for radical transparency.
All the time, from everyone.
From our governments, from our companies, even from ourselves on social media. I mean, the whole assumption, is that if we just have total clarity, that leads to total trust, better results.
Right. The operating theory is see everything, trust everything, solve everything. Simple.
But that's the tension, isn't it?
Uh,
If that's true, why are we all so completely overwhelmed by information? Why are we missing the huge critical facts that are sitting right in front of our faces? And I mean, why is trust of all things actually eroding?
That's it. That is the core contradiction. It's this deep tension between our very human need for certainty, that desire for perfect, clean clarity, and the much harsher reality. A reality that you see in biology and politics and history, that some of the most important truths, and frankly the strongest systems, are actually found in ambiguity, in a kind of strategic imperfection, or they're just hiding in plain sight while we're all looking somewhere else.
And that tension is exactly where these really counterintuitive ideas we're exploring today come from. So first up, why is the perfect secret so often the one that's hidden right in front of your eyes?
And second, the organizations that we actually trust the most,
Right.
they aren't the ones sharing every single little thing. They're the ones that know exactly what not to share.
And maybe the one with the highest stakes, the most immediate danger. The difference between life and death in a crisis literally comes down to realizing that your visual barrier is not a ballistic shield.
So our mission today is to pull all of this together. We're looking at corporate manifestos, ancient political theory, even biology, to really nail down this core binary. And that binary is radical transparency, clarity and visibility, versus imperfect concealment, ambiguity, and hidden in plain sight.
Okay.
And what the sources show is this single unifying rule. The real effectiveness of any system, organizational, biological, political, it all comes down to intelligently managing the boundaries between what is known and what is obscured.
So it's not about what's shown, it's about what the system chooses not to show.
That's where the genius is. And to unpack that, we're going to dive into this corporate mandate for hyperrealism. We'll explore these ancient definitions of secrecy that, frankly, still run modern politics. And then we're going to get to my favorite part.
The glass frog.
The humble glass frog,
Yeah.
and how it uses imperfection as the ultimate camouflage, and how that connects directly back to our own pretty disastrous cognitive failures.
All right, let's get into it. The corporate world seems like the right place to start. Our sources point to this.
Well, it's a huge philosophical push, really championed by thinkers like Ray Dalio for what he calls radical truth and radical transparency.
Yeah, and it's important to say this isn't just, a management fad. It's a whole worldview. It's rooted in this very firm belief that truth, and by that he means an accurate, completely unvarnished understanding of reality, is the absolute foundation for any good outcome. It's non-negotiable.
That's the starting point. So the whole purpose of this radical transparency is to what? Force the ugly stuff to the surface.
Immediately. Force uncomfortable issues, potential failures, personal weaknesses.
Yeah.
Get them out in the open. The idea is to expose the problems people are dealing with and how they're dealing with them so that the entire organization's brainpower can be thrown at solving it.
Based on all the evidence, not just what one person wants you to see.
Exactly. And the argument for why this is better, even if it feels, a bit brutal at first.
It sounds incredibly brutal. Oh, it is. The sources are clear on that. It's very difficult initially because, people just struggle with uncomfortable realities, especially when it's about their own screw-ups. But the payoff, supposedly, is psychological comfort.
Comfort. How do you get comfort from
Because
that?
eventually, once people get used to it, living in that kind of culture is actually more comfortable than living in what he calls the fog of not knowing what's going on.
Ah, okay. So it gets rid of the office politics,
Ooh,
the
right.
rumor mill.
All of it.
Oh.
A constant guesswork. You know where you stand.
But let's stay on that cost for a second, because the human element here seems huge. I mean, if a company is radically transparent and highlights every single internal mistake, every failure, doesn't that just make the company look completely incompetent?
That is the big risk. It's the risk of misinterpretation. An organization that's, radically open about all its problems might look worse, especially to outsiders or new employees, than a competitor who just keeps all that stuff under wraps.
Right. The quiet ones look more competent.
They look it. But the source is adamant that the organization willing to confront its reality, to put its problems on the table, is the one that's actually more likely to succeed in the long run. Because they're not hiding. They're actively engaged in evolution.
And this brings us from just, corporate governance to a much deeper philosophical idea, which the source calls hyperrealism.
Exactly. Hyperrealism isn't about just being realistic. It defines success with a formula. Dreams plus reality plus determination. And the absolute cornerstone there is reality. You have to embrace it no matter how painful it is.
And the logic for that comes from nature.
Straight from nature. Evolution is called the single greatest, most permanent force in the universe. So the mandate for the organization, and for you, is just brutally simple. Evolve or die.
And evolution is not a comfortable process. It's friction, it's pain, it's adaptation, which of course leads to the infamous pain equation.
Pain plus reflection, progress. This is the engine of growth in this entire system. To get stronger, you have to push your limits. That process is necessarily painful. And the instruction is to go to the pain rather than avoid it.
So when you fail, that pain is a signal.
It's a diagnostic tool. It forces you and everyone around you to reflect on what went wrong, the whole causal loop, so you can improve the design of the system.
Okay, I get the principle of pain as a diagnostic, but this is where it gets a little, weird for you. The machine metaphor. You're told to view yourself as the designer of your own machine that's operating inside a bigger organizational machine. That feels
Dehumanizing.
a little, yeah.
Well, the goal is to enforce objectivity. The argument is that the biggest mistake any of us make is that we can't see ourselves objectively. We just lack the detachment to see our own weaknesses, the ones that lead to the same mistakes over and over again.
So you have to step outside yourself and analyze your own process, your machine, like an engineer.
Right. But because total self-objectivity is impossible, the system demands that you rely on the input of others, on the whole body of evidence.
But that's the part I struggle with, relying on others to point out my flaws. In a competitive work environment, that sounds like a recipe for a really toxic culture, regardless of what the intention is. Why would I trust my colleague who might benefit from highlighting my weaknesses?
And that is where the system tries to build in a safeguard. It's called believability-weighted decision-making.
Okay, break that down.
The core assumption is that if everyone is radically open-minded, then it works. This is how you apply that open-mindedness. It means you have to sincerely believe that you might not know the best path forward. You have to recognize that your ability to deal with not knowing is actually more important than whatever you do know.
Give me a real-world example. How does believability actually outweigh, say, a hierarchy in a meeting?
Okay, so imagine your company is deciding to launch a new feature. The CEO, who is paid millions but has been consistently wrong about product launches for the past 3 years, suggests a timeline. A mid-level engineer, who has a 5-year track record of being spot on with her predictions and analysis, suggests a timeline that's twice as long.
All right.
In a believability-weighted system, you don't just ignore the CEO, but you weigh the engineer's input far, far more heavily because her track record, her believability score in that specific area, is objectively higher.
So it's about competence related to the actual decision, not your job title.
Mm-hmm.
It forces you to, as the quote says, realize that you can't put out without taking in. You have to take in reality before you act. That's the ideal then.
That's the ideal of radical transparency. But now we have to crash that ideal into the messy reality of the digital age. Because that old truism that more transparency equals more trust, it's being completely broken by technology.
The Deloitte research is pretty stark on this. It says 86% of leaders still think more transparency leads to more trust. But the source calls the modern digital landscape a gold mine and a landmine.
And the landmine is this explosion of new digital visibility. Technology now allows for this microscopic, constant watchfulness. We're talking illumination in every corner.
This isn't just about tracking when you log in anymore, is it?
Oh, not at all. We're talking about extensive data collection on keystroke frequency, the specific apps you're using, emotional tone analysis of your emails and your calls,
Wow.
physical location tracking, even behavioral monitoring to see if you have the right cultural fit. And leaders love it, of course, because it promises these incredibly fine-grained insights into performance.
And right there, that's where the trade-off between transparency and trust just becomes critical.
Yeah.
We have to start separating out the different kinds of visibility.
Absolutely. You have proactive transparency, which is intentional and it's meant to build trust. Think of Patagonia publishing its entire supply chain, or a software company making its code open source.
Okay, that's the good kind.
Then there's reactive transparency, which is just complying with laws, like posting salary ranges. But the real problem is forced transparency. This is collecting and analyzing worker information as a blanket policy, often without any meaningful consent, and using it for surveillance.
Yeah, forced transparency just kills trust because the underlying message is suspicion. It's saying, I don't trust you to do your job, so I have to watch you do it.
And the data on this is just crystal clear. The studies show that workforce turnover is almost twice as high at companies that use this kind of monitoring software compared to ones that don't.
Twice as high.
Because when the employee feels like the transparency only benefits the boss and it's not tied to some mutual goal, that psychological contract is just shattered.
And the response from employees isn't better work, is it? It's what the sources call productivity theater.
Precisely. It's workers consciously faking it to satisfy the algorithm. You see people using mouse-moving machines or scripts just to look active, or they're sending constant, pointless emails to register collaboration.
And the organizations do it too. When they're forced to be transparent about pay, they just post these uselessly wide salary ranges like $50,000 to $250,000.
Which renders the transparency completely pointless. It just checks a legal box.
And the cost to innovation. I mean, innovation relies on that private failure, that reflection we talked about earlier. This must be catastrophic for creativity.
It's called the spotlight effect. Creativity is all about risk. It requires experiments, and a lot of times it requires failing in private. So when creative people feel like every little experiment is going to be made public or put under a microscope by management,
They just stop taking risks.
they avoid it completely. Innovation dies because the most radical and potentially valuable ideas are hidden from the monitoring system.
So total visibility just leads to two outcomes. Workers who are trying to deceive you and innovators who are afraid to take risks. That can't be a sustainable model.
It's not. It requires balance. The solution seems to be moving away from a surveillance mandate and towards a conversation over mandate. It has to be built on mutual benefit, a give-to-get approach.
So let workers opt in to data collection if it helps them, like for career coaching or something.
Exactly. Or for something that genuinely improves safety for everyone, not just for punishment. At the end of the day, trust is the glue that holds things together when the boundaries disappear, and you only earn that trust by protecting what should be kept private.
Which proves that strategically managing these boundaries is absolutely essential for any healthy system, whether it's a single person or a huge global company.
And that idea of intelligently managing boundaries isn't new at all. It takes on a much darker political and historical shade when you look at how governments manage information. This is basically a form of strategic political time management that goes all the way back to the Roman Empire.
It's amazing how those ancient ideas about secrecy just map perfectly onto what we see in politics today. The sources bring up two really distinct concepts that are not just about what is kept secret, but how that secret is managed over time.
Right, and that how is what defines the power structure of the state.
So the first one is the classic, locked in a vault, Mission Impossible style secret, the kind the police in our story later are going to be looking for.
That is the arcanum. It comes from the word arca, which means a chest or a treasury. The arcanum is information that is locked away indefinitely. It creates a wall of total inaccessibility. The arcanum imperii, the secret of the state.
Like classified weapons plans or something.
Exactly. Highly classified intelligence. Its power comes from its total absence from the public conversation. We know it exists, but we know nothing about it.
But the second term, secretum, that's where the real strategic manipulation comes in. This is a secret that isn't really hidden at all.
Not really. The secretum comes from a verb that means to sift apart or to separate. So this is a secret that comes from social separation. It's information that the ruling class has, and it's sort of part in and part out of public view.
So it's not locked away.
No, the key thing is that it never comes out all at once. Instead, little pieces of it drip out into public awareness over time. It's used strategically to either inoculate the public against bad news or to spread propaganda. And crucially, the secretum maintains this balance between knowing the secret exists and knowing that we do not know it.
So it keeps everyone in a state of mystery, dependent on the authorities for the next piece of the puzzle.
Precisely. It keeps the public perpetually off balance.
And that structure, that partial strategic release of information, That's critical for understanding how secrets get out in the modern world.
Yeah, we saw three main ways this happens, and they're all different based on the intent. First, you have whistleblowing. That's when someone inside an organization goes around the hierarchy to reveal genuine wrongdoing, usually at great personal risk. The secret is tied to the whistleblower,
Then there's leaking.
which is when secret information is shared with a third party, like a journalist, specifically to keep the source anonymous. The motive could be anything, but the focus stays on the content of the leak.
And then we get to the most destructive form, the one that's designed purely for political manipulation, God. Stovepiping.
Stovepiping is the act of strategically releasing information, often information that's inaccurate or has a heavy partisan spin, directly into the public sphere or up the chain of command, completely bypassing all the normal checks and balances.
So it's an engineered secretum.
It's a perfect engineered secretum. It's a partial truth, or sometimes not a truth at all, released for one reason, to achieve a political outcome, to sow division, to target an enemy.
And this connects directly to how language itself gets weaponized, how the conversation shifts from whether the information is true to how dangerous the act of revealing it is.
This is where we get into some really dangerous metaphor criticism. The most powerful example is the I-bomb metaphor. You take the literal act speech that reveals a state secret, and you frame it using the metaphor of a weapon, an information bomb.
So the speech itself becomes an act of violence.
Exactly. The metaphor suggests the speech isn't journalism, it's not an act of conscience, it's this hypothetically destructive force, a bomb that's going to go off with these unpredictable, devastating consequences for national security.
And we saw this play out so clearly after the WikiLeaks releases back in 2010. You had these huge caches of raw military reports showing mass civilian deaths, strategic failures.
And instead of the conversation being about the facts, about the civilian deaths, about the failures, the entire political conversation was deliberately pushed into this frame of war and treason. You had members of Congress and journalists demanding that WikiLeaks be classified as a terrorist organization.
They used that weaponized language.
Constantly. The time bombs are out there and they're going to go off. The goal is so clear. You encourage this heightened military or police response based on the perception of a threat, this metaphorical bomb, and in doing so, you completely shut down public discussion of the actual facts that were revealed.
It's an incredibly effective strategy because it taps into pre-existing anxieties and it feeds directly into the logic of conspiracy theories, what the historian Richard Hofstadter called the paranoid style in politics.
And the paranoid style is a very specific kind of disinformation. It's not necessarily that the person is delusional. It's a mode of campaigning that's just characterized by, heated exaggeration, suspicion, and these grand conspiratorial fantasies.
It takes real facts and twists them.
It takes perfectly defensible assumptions and carefully selected facts, and then it marshals them all toward this overwhelming, totalizing proof of some vast criminal conspiracy.
And the reason it's so appealing, so sticky, is that it completely rejects complexity.
That's the key. Hofstadter said, the paranoid mentality is far more coherent than the real world, since it leaves no room for mistakes, failures, or ambiguities. It demands perfect coherence. There are no accidents, no incompetence, only plots. It replaces the messy, verifiable complexity of the real world with the simple story of total evil versus total good.
Which leads us to this really critical social problem right now, the paradox of partisan trust. We're seeing this radical distrust in our core institutions, credentialed experts, but at the same time, an almost unquestioning loyalty to partisan figures who benefit from that distrust.
It's the ultimate contradiction, isn't it? People show this profound skepticism toward scientists, economists, journalists, people who dedicate their entire lives to verifying things in their field. But then that skepticism is paired with just unquestioning loyalty to political figures who are actively sowing that anxiety.
Right. They reject the expert who demands verification, but they grant total uncritical trust to a high-profile figure.
Even when all the nonpartisan analysis suggests that person's policies are based on self-interest or just plain bad data.
So why does that happen? Why does allegiance just completely replace evidence?
Because if you can strategically leverage political loyalty to create doubt about verifiable truth, by, framing that truth as a secret held by some evil establishment, then the ultimate goal is to create an environment where you can enact massive changes without any democratic scrutiny.
Allegiance becomes the new truth.
Allegiance becomes the new currency of truth. People willingly put themselves in the position of those who are supposed to believe the secretum that the political authority is offering them, because they'd rather believe the authority than go through the pain and reflection required to navigate a complex, messy, ambiguous reality.
And that whole structure of authority versus belief brings us to one of the most elegant examples of concealment ever. The secret that's not hidden in a vault, but just
Yeah.
in sheer obviousness.
We're talking about anamorphosis. It's this visual trick, a distorted projection that requires you, the viewer, to occupy a very specific, unusual vantage point to see the real image. The hidden meaning is only revealed when you shift your perspective away from the center, away from the norm.
The classic example is that painting, Hans Holbein's The Ambassadors. If you look at it straight on, you see these two very wealthy, worldly men surrounded by all the symbols of human knowledge globe, scientific instruments, books. And then at the bottom, there's this bizarre, elongated, distorted smudge.
Right, the smudge is fully visible, but it makes no sense from the normal viewing position. It looks like a mistake. But then when you shift your perspective, when you move way over to the side and look at the canvas almost sideways, that distortion resolves itself into a perfect, anatomically correct skull.
A memento mori, a reminder of death, hidden right in the middle of this celebration of human achievement.
The secret was there the whole time, fully visible, but contextually, it was completely unintelligible. You have to literally step outside the prescribed frame of reference to see the truth.
And that is the central psychological insight in Edgar Allan Poe's masterpiece, The Purloined Letter.
Poe thought this was his best story of what he called ratiocination, because it's less about clues and deduction and more about psychological insight. The setup is simple. A politically devastating letter has been stolen from a queen by this character, Minister D.
And the police are on the case.
The Parisian police prefect, a man named G, who represents the absolute authority of the law, has conducted this incredibly exhaustive, state-of-the-art search of the minister's home. They've ripped apart walls, ceilings, furniture. They've looked in every possible hidden compartment.
Because they're assuming that such an important secret must be an arcanum. It has to be locked away, walled off.
And that was their fatal flaw. It was habit-driven. The detective, Dupin, realizes the police are brilliant at what they do, but they have zero imagination. They could only see what the law told them to look for, a hidden secret. But Dupin figured that the minister, who is described as both a poet and a mathematician, would know what the police would assume, and so he'd hide it in the most obvious place possible.
So Dupin goes to the minister's apartment.
And he finds the letter. Not in a secret compartment, but it's been crumpled up, readdressed, and just stuck in a cheap little card rack on the mantelpiece. It was so obvious that it was completely invisible to the police and their habit-driven search methods.
Dupin's genius was that he could identify with the criminal's psychology.
Right, and this is where that psychoanalytic reading of the story, as dense as it sounds, becomes really useful. The story presents this formal structure where the secret is defined by 3 different positions relative to the information.
Okay, so what are the 3 positions?
First, you have the dupes. That's the police and the king. They represent the disconnected authority, the superego. They are the rigid law. They fail because they cannot literally blind to the obvious.
Then you have the keepers.
That's the queen, who lost the letter, and the minister, who stole it. They are the conscious actors, the ego. They possess the secret, and they're trying to manage the crisis.
And finally, the perceivers.
Which is both Dupin, the detective, and Minister D, the criminal. They represent the instinctive, imaginative, unconstrained drive, the eyed. Dupin succeeds because he puts himself in that id position. He adopts the perspective of the unconventional mind and realizes that the most obvious thing can be the most perfect shield.
So the lesson is that the secret isn't about the content of the letter. It's about the structure of knowledge itself. If your method is too rigid, if you're always looking for the deeply hidden thing, you will be blind to the truth that's hiding in plain sight.
And that story of the police being blind leads us perfectly into our 3rd section, which is all about our own internal psychological failures. Why do we all consistently miss the obvious?
It's because our own internal focusing mechanisms, the very things we need to function every day, actually create a kind of necessary blindness.
Yeah, this failure to see what's right there is formally known as inattentional blindness, or IB. And the definition is pretty simple. It's the failure to perceive a fully visible but unexpected stimulus because your attention is engaged on another task.
And the classic experiment here, of course, is the invisible gorilla test.
Right. You ask people to watch a video and do a demanding task, like count the number number of basketball passes one team makes. And because their attention is so focused on counting, a huge percentage of them fail to notice a person in a full gorilla costume walk right through the middle of the scene, beat their chest, and walk off.
The gorilla is fully visible, but because their attention is just locked elsewhere, they don't see it.
And this creates a really serious real-world danger, something called cognitive capture or tunneling. It's an IB phenomenon where a person is so over-focused on their instruments or a specific task or even just a thought in their own head that they become functionally blind to their environment.
Like a pilot focused only on one gauge. Or even just a driver who's so lost in thought they miss something on the road.
Exactly. Or think about trying to assemble some complex piece of furniture while also listening to a complicated financial report. Your mental workload is so high, you might miss a huge safety cue right in your peripheral vision.
So what are the mechanisms here? What determines whether we see the gorilla or not? How much can our attention actually handle before we go blind?
One of the key factors is perceptual load. The research shows that the higher your cognitive demand, your mental workload, the more likely you are to experience inattentional blindness.
So the harder your brain is working on task A.
The less likely it is to notice unexpected thing B. For example, researchers had people do a simple task, like just rehearsing some words, versus a hard task, like rearranging those words in their memory. The people doing the harder task were far more likely to miss an unexpected visual stimulus. Your brain is basically prioritizing a critical process, and it just stops rendering non-essential visuals to save power.
And the visual properties of the unexpected thing itself also matter a lot.
That's conspicuity and similarity. Your chances of seeing an unexpected object go way up if it shares features with what you're already paying attention to. So if you're told to count black letters bouncing on a screen, you're way more likely to notice an unexpected black cross than a white one.
Because your brain is tuned to black.
Your attentional set is tuned for black, and if the unexpected object is different enough, you just miss it entirely, even if it's big and bright.
So inattentional blindness is really a failure of attentional capture. And the key word is unexpected. We should probably distinguish this from a couple of related ideas.
Yeah, that's important. IB is often confused with inattentional amnesia, which is when you fail to remember something you actually saw. So maybe you did see the gorilla, but you forgot it instantly because it wasn't relevant to your task.
And it's also different from change blindness.
Right. Change blindness is failing to notice a change between two scenes, usually because there's a brief interruption, like a camera cut in a movie. IB is unique because the failure happens before memory or comparison. The unexpected object is just never brought into your conscious awareness in the first place because your attention was busy.
It really shows that our own perceptual system, just like the police and Poe's story, is excellent at finding what it expects to find and catastrophically bad at seeing what it doesn't.
And that brings us to the biological world, where nature has absolutely mastered this art of managing visibility through what we could call the genius of imperfect transparency. This is the strategy of the glass frog.
The glass frog is famous for being transparent, but the sources say that's not quite the full story.
Not at all. A glass frog is not truly transparent, like a glasswing butterfly, for instance, whose wings are almost completely clear. The glass frog's top skin, its dorsum, is actually pigmented green. It's only its belly, the ventral skin, that's translucent. You can see its organs through it.
So if its top is green and its core is visible, what's the point? What good is this imperfect glass?
The key is context. It all has to do with the frog's specific environment and this idea of strategic imperfection.
Okay.
So the glass frog has this generalist green camouflage, and during the day it stays perfectly still, resting flat against a living green leaf. Now, that background, the leaf, is pretty consistent in color and its hue, but its brightness, its luminance changes wildly as the sun moves or clouds pass over.
Right, so a solid green color that works in the bright sun would stand out in deep shadow.
Exactly. And the frog's translucency is the solution. It's not about disappearing. It's about being able to dynamically blend in with that specific shifting background.
How does that work?
The process is called diffuse light transmission. The translucency allows the perceived brightness of the frog to change in real time. As the leaf under it gets brighter or darker, that translucency lets the light from the leaf scatter or diffuse through the frog's body, so it passively adjusts its camouflage to match the background brightness.
That's a huge advantage. It doesn't have to waste energy changing color.
It achieves passive blending just by being partially see-through. But the real genius, the part that connects right back to Dupin and hiding in plain sight, is how the frog manages its edges. That's where a predator's visual system is most likely to detect its shape.
The outline.
This is the critical insight, edge diffusion. All visual systems, human or predator, are highly sensitive to high contrast outlines. So the frog rests with its relatively opaque green body, and it's surrounded by its much more translucent legs. These legs create a diffuse gradient, a soft fade from the leaf to the solid body.
It's blurring the line between itself and the background.
Exactly. It doesn't disappear. It transforms its own salient, high contrast outline into a less conspicuous blended shape. The camouflage works not by becoming invisible, but by strategically diffusing its boundary. It's the perfect biological metaphor. Mastery isn't about total visibility, it's about intelligent boundary management.
And that lesson, that distinction between visibility and actual substance, brings us to the highest stakes application of this whole deep dive. The life-saving difference between cover and concealment in a crisis.
This is the ultimate practical test of cognitive clarity. In a high-stress, life-or-death situation, our instinct is to find a visual barrier, something that hides us from sight. And the danger is that relying on that visual barrier, on concealment, gives you a fatal false sense of security.
So let's be really clear on the distinction.
Concealment is just a visual barrier. It hides you from sight, but it offers zero ballistic protection. It's an optical shield, nothing more. Think cubicle walls, curtains, most interior drywall, even bushes. A perpetrator might not see you, but a bullet will go right through.
Yeah, okay, and cover.
Cover is a physical, dense barrier that provides genuine ballistic protection. It's something substantial enough to actually stop or deflect incoming rounds. It offers real substance, not just a change in visibility.
So we're talking about things like concrete pillars, the engine block of a car.
Right, the engine block, but not the door or the chassis. A solid brick wall, large, dense metal equipment. The critical decision, the one that requires that split-second cognitive clarity, is to instantly evaluate, will this stop a bullet?
The ultimate takeaway here is that visibility is often totally irrelevant when you're facing a real physical threat. You cannot confuse optical appearance with physical substance. And that false equivalence, the idea that if they can't see me, the threat is gone, that's the final deadly danger of the lack of clarity we've been talking about.
So this whole journey, it's taken us from a corporation's desire for pure truth, through ancient political manipulation to our own failures of attention, and finally to the brilliant camouflage in the natural world.
And the connecting thread is just undeniable. Every single one of these systems, the organization trying to build trust, the political state managing its authority, the glass frog avoiding a predator, they all have to strategically manage visibility. Total, relentless transparency is either inefficient, impossible, or, as we saw with surveillance, it's actually manipulative and it damages the system.
So let's try to consolidate all of this into a final toolkit so you can walk away with some simple, actionable ideas for analyzing the world.
Okay, let's start with the corporate ideal we need to be critical of: radical transparency.
Right, so radical transparency is all about maximizing visibility to solve problems by forcing the uncomfortable stuff out. But the inherent risk is information overload, misinterpretation, and if it becomes surveillance, the total destruction of trust. The core idea, though, remains. Eventually, for people who get used to it, living in a culture of radical transparency is more comfortable than living in the fog of not knowing what's going on.
Next up, the cognitive trap that makes us all dupes at one time or another: inattentional blindness.
Inattentional blindness is that failure to see the completely obvious, unexpected thing because your attention is focused somewhere else. Specifically because it doesn't match what you expect to see. Just remember the finding. The failure to notice a fully visible, that unexpected object because attention was engaged on another task, event, or object.
Third, the political structures that keep us in line: arcanum and secretum.
Arcanum is the secret of the state that's locked away indefinitely. It's all about control through mystery. And secretum is the strategically leaked, partially revealed secret that's used to maintain authority and keep the public in that perpetual balance of knowing that we do not know it. That's the core strategy for managing political time and loyalty.
And finally, the antidote to our own inability to see our flaws: believability-weighted decision-making.
This is the skill of recognizing that true self-objectivity is impossible. So it forces you to actively seek out input from other people who are strong where you are weak. You have to embrace the pain of disagreement and reflection and recognize that your ability to deal with not knowing is more important than what you do know. The instruction is simple. Realize that you can't put out without taking in.
So this whole debate between radical transparency and strategic concealment, it's like a high-performance computer operating system. We need to unify all this with one last analogy:
That's a perfect way to think about it. As a user, you think you want total access to the core code. You're demanding radical transparency. But a good, stable operating system actually relies on certain complex processes being deliberately hidden or simplified. Call it translucency or secretum. It does that so you, the user, don't suffer from information overload or cognitive capture, and you can just focus on your main task.
Right. If the OS showed you every single background process running at all times, you'd be paralyzed. You couldn't get anything done.
And the glass frog is the perfectly tuned system in that analogy. It only shows what it needs to in order to blend into its immediate variable background. It manages those luminance changes with its translucency, all while keeping its opaque, vital core protected.
That strategic concealment of the edges is what ensures the whole system stays functionally invisible to threats. It maintains its integrity.
It's the difference between overwhelming noise and meaningful signal. It's about the intelligent non-disclosure of specific high-contrast information, which allows the entire system to run smoothly.
So we'll leave you, the learner, with this final challenge. Are you suffering from cognitive capture right now? Is it preventing you from seeing the obvious? Is your attention so tunneled in on your expected task, your job, your routine, your beliefs, that you are completely blind to the metaphorical gorilla walking right past you, or the crucial truth that's crumpled up on the mantelpiece escaping your notice just because it's too obvious?
And if secrets are sustained by the belief of those who are supposed to believe in the authority of the subject supposed to know, the superego, then how does actively practicing radical open-mindedness become the ultimate act of intellectual surveillance? By going to the pain, by seeking out believable people who disagree with you, you are turning that critical scrutiny back on the authorities, back on the organizational machine, and most importantly, back on the deeply held assumptions that run your own mind. That embrace of pain and reflection, that is the application of the ultimate truth. It's how you force your own personal evolution, rather than just waiting for reality to force it on you.
That is the perfect place to end. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.
Until next time.